Bronx, New York, summer 1997. The block was buzzing long before the concert even began. Thousands packed into the outdoor arena at Crotona Park, a mix of soul fans, hip-hop heads, families, and kids who'd grown up hearing Stevie Wonder's music echo from fourth-floor windows. The night air vibrated with bass, laughter, and the electricity of a crowd ready for something unforgettable. Stevie had just finished a soaring rendition of Higher Ground, sweat glistening on his forehead as the band prepared to shift into the next groove. But before they could hit the first chord, Stevie lifted a hand. He froze, tilted his head, listened. Something down in the audience had caught his attention, something unexpected. In the middle of the standing crowd, a circle had formed, people cheering, laughing, shouting encouragement. Inside the circle was a kid no older than 13, skinny, wearing beat-up sneakers and a hand-drawn t-shirt. His name was Darius, and he was rapping with everything he had, sharp, fast, hungry. His friends hyped him up like he was already famous. Every bar hit with the kind of fire only a kid with something to prove could deliver. But he wasn't just freestyling. He was rapping to the rhythm of Stevie's band, matching their tempo from across the arena, as if he'd rehearsed with them his whole life. The crowd around him went wild. Darius didn't even notice Stevie had stopped the show. He was lost in the beat, lost in the moment, lost in himself. Stevie smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Yo," he said into the mic, surprising the entire crowd. "Who is that young brother down there making all that noise?" The cameras swung toward the circle. People pointed, cheering harder. Stevie leaned over, gripping his mic stand. "Little man," he said with a laugh, "you're about to make me jealous." The arena erupted. Stevie raised a hand to security. "Bring him up here." The crowd exploded in disbelief. Darius froze mid-verse, eyes wide, chest heaving. His friends pushed him forward, shouting, "Bro, go, that's Stevie Wonder!" And as security made their way through the crowd, 20,000 people realized Stevie Wonder had just stopped his entire concert for a kid rapping in the park. The security guards guided Darius toward the stage as the crowd chanted his name, first in pockets, then spreading like wildfire until thousands were shouting, "Darius! Darius!" The boy stumbled forward in disbelief, hands shaking, legs barely able to move. His friends recorded everything on cheap camcorders, screaming like they had just watched their boy win the lottery. When Darius finally reached the foot of the stage, he froze. The lights were blinding. The noise was overwhelming. And above him, Stevie Wonder, legend, icon, superstar, was leaning forward with an outstretched hand. "Come on up here, young king," Stevie said, grinning like he already believed in the kid. The audience roared as Darius was lifted onto the stage. Once Darius stood beside him, Stevie placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "So," Stevie said, tilting his head with amusement, "you out here stealing my audience tonight?" The crowd erupted with laughter. Darius, overwhelmed, could barely breathe. No, sir," he stammered. "I was just messing around." Stevie chuckled. "Messing around? Sounded like you were shaking the whole park." The band laughed behind their instruments. Darius covered his face with both hands, too stunned to speak. Stevie lifted the boy's chin gently. "What's your name, little brother?" The boy swallowed hard. "Darius." Stevie nodded. "Darius, you got heart." Then Stevie held out his microphone, slowly, deliberately, like he was offering a torch to the next bearer. The audience reacted instantly, screaming, jumping, grabbing their heads in disbelief. Darius stared at the mic as if it was something holy. Stevie whispered, "If you're brave enough to rap out, there. You're brave enough to rap up here." Darius's knees nearly buckled. I can't," he whispered. Stevie smiled. "You already did." He gently placed the microphone into Darius's trembling hand. "Give me 8 bars. Just 8. Show them who you are." The crowd leaned forward as one living body, the entire park trembling with anticipation. Darius closed his eyes, just for a moment, took a deep breath, and lifted the mic. The beat dropped behind him the moment he opened his mouth. And what came out didn't just surprise the crowd, it stunned Stevie Wonder himself. The moment Darius opened his mouth, the entire atmosphere shifted. His voice came out sharp, rhythmic, perfectly synced to the beat Stevie's drummer laid down behind him. His first lines sliced through the air with confidence nobody expected from a skinny 13-year-old pulled out of a crowd. The audience gasped, then erupted. Darius didn't hesitate. He rode the rhythm like he'd been born on it. His words hit. Fast, clever, alive. Lines about growing up in the Bronx, about dreaming big even when life stayed small, about grinding through every obstacle like music was the only thing that kept his heart beating. His flow wasn't just good, it was dangerously good. Real, raw, hungry. Stevie's jaw dropped. The band stared at each other like, oh, this kid is the real thing. The boy found the groove so effortlessly that the band instinctively tightened the pocket, elevating him. Bass thumped deeper. Hi-hats sharpened. Keys shimmered. Darius responded like he had been rehearsing with them for months, switching cadences, flipping rhythms, letting his voice dance on top of the beat. At one point he spun toward Stevie and delivered a bar so bold, so clean, that the entire arena screamed, and Stevie slapped the air with both hands like he'd just been hit with gospel truth. People were climbing onto their seats. Security guards were nodding to the beat. Even the camera crew forgot to film for a second because they were too busy shouting. But then came the moment. Darius paused for half a breath, eyes scanning the crowd, and unleashed a hook he clearly made up on the spot. A hook so catchy, so explosive, so electrifying that the entire place lost its mind. Gotta see it to believe it. Feel it in your soul. Music makes the broken pieces finally feel whole. 20,000 people screamed the second the hook hit. The line hit like lightning. It wasn't just a lyric, it was a revelation, a pulse straight from the heart of the Bronx. Stevie staggered back a step, hand to his chest, unable to hide his shock. The band went wild, drummer shouting, bassist laughing in disbelief, horn players throwing their fists in the air. The hook echoed through the park, bouncing off every building, rattling every heart. In that instant, Darius wasn't a kid anymore. He was a force, a star, a voice the world hadn't seen coming, and Stevie Wonder knew it. As soon as the hook dropped, Stevie lifted his head toward the sky and let out a stunned laugh, one of those deep, joyful, disbelieving laughs that only come when something truly miraculous happens on stage. The band instinctively cut the music, not because Darius stumbled, but because they needed a second to process what they'd just witnessed. The silence hit like a punch, and in that sudden stillness, the entire arena burst into a roar that could have shaken the Bronx down to its foundations. Darius stood frozen, mic trembling in his hand, chest rising and falling like he'd just sprinted through his own destiny. His eyes widened as he realized that the screaming, this avalanche of sound, was for him and Stevie. Stevie stepped forward slowly, almost reverently, as if approaching a young king. Stevie rested both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Darius," he said, voice low, full of emotion, "you just did something most grown men are afraid to do." The crowd shouted their agreement. Stomping, clapping, screaming his name again, Darius shook his head, overwhelmed. I was just playing around," he whispered. Stevie chuckled softly. "No, young brother, that wasn't playing around. That was purpose." The word hung in the air like a blessing. Darius blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but to Stevie, those tears weren't weakness. They were proof of a soul that had been waiting its whole life to be seen. "You hear that crowd?" Stevie asked, gesturing toward the key. "Roaring arena. They aren't screaming for me right now. They're screaming for you." The audience responded with another explosion of cheers so loud it drowned out the summer night. People who had never heard of Darius until 3 minutes ago were now chanting his name like he had topped the charts for a decade. Some fans were crying, others were laughing in pure disbelief. Even the musicians behind Stevie looked shaken, like they had just witnessed the birth of something extraordinary, something sacred. And then Stevie did something no one expected. He lifted Darius's wrist and raised it high above their heads, like a boxing champion after a knockout victory. The crowd went berserk. Darius stared at his own raised arm in disbelief, his mouth falling open. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a coronation, a passing of the torch, a declaration to the world that this kid, this street rapper from the Bronx, had a fire inside him too bright to be ignored. Stevie leaned close, to the boy's ear, whispering something the mic didn't catch, something only Darius would ever hear. The boy's eyes filled instantly, his lips trembling, as if those words had reached the deepest part of him. And as he lowered the boy's hand, Stevie knew the night had changed forever, not just for Darius, but for every single person in that park, because something unstoppable had been set in motion, and it was only going to grow from here. Stevie took a slow step back, giving Darius the full spotlight, something he rarely did, something reserved only for the rare few who carried that spark, that unexplainable grind of genius. The boy looked out over the sea of faces, thousands of phones lifted, thousands of voices chanting his name, and for the first time in his life, he didn't shrink from attention. He rose into it. His shoulders straightened, his breathing steadied, and a shy confidence began to form in the corners of his smile. Stevie sensed the shift immediately. "There he is," Stevie said softly into the mic, smiling. "There's the young man I heard in the rhythm of the crowd." The audience roared, and Darius placed a hand over his chest, overwhelmed by a love he had never expected to feel from strangers. Stevie motioned for the band to bring the beat back, soft, gentle, like a heartbeat carrying the moment forward. The drummer tapped lightly on the rims, the bass murmured a warm vibration, and the keyboard layered faint chords under the night air. Stevie leaned toward Darius. "You got one more in you?" he asked with a grin. The crowd erupted. "Yes!" Darius froze, eyes wide. "One more," he whispered, like Stevie had just asked him to fly. Stevie nodded. "One more hook, the one you just made. But this time," he turned toward the 30,000 people in the park. "We're all gonna sing it with you." The reaction was volcanic. People screamed, jumped, grabbed their friends, shaking them like we're about to be part of something legendary. Darius took a shaky breath, lifted the microphone to his mouth and whispered, "Aight." The crowd leaned in as the beat settled into a perfect pocket. Stevie touched Darius's back gently, not pushing, not guiding, just letting him know he wasn't alone. The boy closed his eyes, reached deep, and launched into the hook again. "Gotta see it to believe it. Feel it in your soul. Music makes the broken pieces finally feel whole." This time, the entire arena screamed the words, "With him." The sound was monstrous, beautiful, overwhelming. It echoed against the apartment buildings. It shook the stage. It rippled through the trees like the Bronx itself was singing. Darius staggered backward in shock, tears streaming down his face as Stevie steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. No one in that crowd would ever forget the moment a kid from the streets made 30,000 people chant a hook he had created seconds earlier. Stevie threw his head back, laughing, in disbelief, clapping like he'd just witnessed a miracle, and in a way, he had. Because at that moment, Darius wasn't a kid anymore. He was a voice, a movement, a spark that had just found oxygen. As the final echo of the hook faded into the night, Stevie signaled the band to let the moment breathe. The music softened into a hum. The crowd settled into an electric hush, and Darius stood trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the shock of realizing he had just commanded an entire arena. Stevie turned toward him fully, his face glowing with pride. "Darius," he said softly, microphone lowered so only the first few rows could hear, "do you know what you just did tonight?" The boy shook his head, wiping his cheeks with the back of his hand. Stevie lifted his mic. "You made 30,000 people believe in you. That's a power most folks never feel in their entire lives." The audience erupted again, cheering the boy's name, their energy rising like a tidal wave. Behind Stevie's words, Stevie then motioned to the front row. "Mama, you out there?" A woman's voice cried out in shock, and the spotlight swung until it landed on a black woman clutching her chest, tears streaming down her face. Darius gasped. "Ma?" Stevie grinned. "Bring her up here." The crowd exploded into applause as security guided her toward the stage. When she reached the platform and climbed up, her hands were shaking as she ran straight to her son, wrapping him in a trembling embrace. "Baby," she sobbed, "you didn't tell me you could do all that." Darius clung to her, crying just as hard. The arena watched in silence, moved by a scene more powerful than any song. Stevie let them have their moment. No music, no talking, just a mother and son living a dream neither ever expected. When she finally pulled away, Stevie stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said gently, "your boy has a gift, a real one." She nodded through tears. "He's been writing in notebooks since he was little," she whispered. "Says music is the only place he feels seen." Stevie placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. "Well," he said, turning toward the roaring crowd, "he's seen now." The cheers that followed were deafening. Darius lowered his head, overwhelmed, the weight of the moment sinking into him like sunlight warming a cold soul. Stevie leaned down, speaking softly into the boy's ear. "Your life changed tonight, young king. Don't you ever forget this feeling. Don't you ever let it go." The drummer tapped a soft roll on the snare, signaling the music's return. The band prepared to start the next song, but Stevie raised a hand once more, holding the moment still. Darius held his mother tightly, the crowd chanting his name like he was already a star. And Stevie, feeling the gravity of what had just happened, knew he needed to close this moment in a way that honored the boy's courage and the crowd's emotion. He stepped forward, raised the mic, and prepared to deliver one final gesture that would etch this night forever in music history. The arena lights dimmed until only two silhouettes remained illuminated on stage: Stevie Wonder and Darius, still holding tight to his mother's hand. The band waited in complete stillness, sensing that Stevie was about to turn this incredible moment into something unforgettable. Stevie stepped forward, raising the microphone with a slowness that commanded every soul in the park to listen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice warm and steady, "tonight you didn't just see a performance, you witnessed a birth." The crowd erupted, and Stevie nodded toward Darius. This young brother stepped out of the crowd with nothing but courage and rhythm in his spirit, and look what he did. He paused, letting the cheering wash over them. Then he continued, "Music isn't about fame. It isn't about money. Music is about truth. And this boy," Stevie rested his hand on Darius's shoulder, "who'd rapped his truth so loud it shook the whole park." The crowd roared again, people raising their arms, phones and lighters in emotional tribute. Stevie then leaned closer to Darius and spoke softly into the mic. "You didn't come here to be a star tonight, but sometimes God puts a spotlight on a soul before the world is ready, just to show us what's possible." Gasps rippled through the arena. Darius stared at Stevie, his eyes full of awe, his voice gone. Stevie turned toward the band and lifted his hand. They played a soft, rising chord, majestic, cinematic, the sound of a moment being sealed into history. Stevie then crouched next to Darius, speaking just loud enough for the mic to catch. "My young king, every time you doubt yourself, remember tonight. Remember that 30,000 people screamed your name. Remember that your voice made strangers feel something. Remember that your gift is real." The boy nodded, fighting tears. His mother held his hand to her, heart overwhelmed by what her son had been given. A moment, a platform, a possibility. Stevie rose back to full height and faced the crowd. "I want everyone here," Stevie said, "to give this young man the loudest celebration of the night, because talent like his, that's the future." The arena exploded. Screams, applause, chants, an ocean of joy. Stevie hugged Darius, whispering something only he would ever know. Then he guided the boy and his mother gently toward the stage exit, letting them disappear into the wings like royalty leaving a coronation. As they left, Stevie returned to the microphone and grinned. "Now that," he said, "is what happens when you let the street write the hook." The crowd roared with laughter and cheers. Then the band hit the opening notes of the next song, and the night surged forward. But nobody in that park would ever forget the moment a kid from the Bronx made Stevie Wonder stop his show and made an entire arena scream his name.